What really happened in the Dyatlov Pass? In the desolate, snow-choked expanse of the Ural Mountains, February 1959, 9 experienced hikers vanished. Weeks later, their bodies surfaced, yet the scene of their demise defied logical explanation. What truly happened on that frigid night, high on a slope known to the indigenous Mansi as Khalat Siekel, Dead Mountain? This story will meticulously examine the evidence, confront the unsettling truths, and pry open the official reports that have, for decades, offered only silence. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the 20th century's most enduring and disturbing unsolved mysteries. Led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student, the group comprised 8 other skilled adventurers. Young, resilient, and meticulously prepared, their ambition was a challenging winter trek through the treacherous Sverdlovsk Oblast, culminating in an ascent of Mount Otorten. Journals and photographs chronicle their progress, the camaraderie, the harsh beauty of the landscape, the laughter. Their last known entry, dated February 1st, spoke of setting up camp on the eastern slope of Khalat Siekel, preparing for the next day's push. Then silence. The prearranged telegram, signaling their safe return, never arrived. A search operation, initially small, rapidly escalated. What searchers found days later was not a distress signal, but an absence. The tent, half buried in snow, was oddly pitched, its entrance facing away from the prevailing wind. But it was the fabric itself that chilled, slashed open from the inside, a violent, desperate escape. Inside, gear, food, even most of their warm clothing remained abandoned. The first bodies were discovered further down the slope, near the edge of a small forest. Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Dorshenko, clad only in underwear and torn shirts, lay by the remains of a crude fire. Hypothermia was the immediate cause of death, yet strange bruising marred their forms. A deeper disquiet began to settle over the snow-covered pass. The weeks that followed brought more grim revelations. Over time, the remaining 7 bodies were located, some partially buried, others entombed beneath meters of snow in a ravine. The injuries were perplexing, escalating the horror beyond simple exposure. Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov suffered massive blunt force trauma, fractured skulls and broken ribs, impacts so severe they were likened to a car crash. Yet bafflingly, there were no external wounds corresponding to such force. Dubinina, in particular, was found with her tongue and eyes missing, a gaping void in her face that would haunt investigators for decades. Nicholas Thibox-Brignoles had a crushed skull. Paradoxical undressing was another chilling anomaly. Some victims, like Krivonishenko and Doroshenko, were barely clothed in sub-zero temperatures, while others wore multiple layers, some belonging to their companions. Their footprints leading away from the tent were scattered and disorganized, suggesting panic, disorientation, perhaps a flight in darkness. Further layers of mystery emerged. Small traces of radiation were detected on several articles of clothing, an unexplained detail in an otherwise remote wilderness. The initial Soviet investigation, remarkably swift, concluded that the deaths were caused by an unknown compelling natural force, before sealing the case files for decades. This official obfuscation only deepened the shadow already cast by Dead Mountain, transforming a tragic hiking accident into an enduring enigma. Decades of analysis have yielded a spectrum of theories, each attempting to piece together this shattered narrative. The prevailing avalanche theory, often favored by official inquiries, posits that a slab of snow shifted, prompting the hikers to cut their way out and flee. Yet a crucial flaw persists. The slope was gentle, the snowpack stable, An expert analysis suggests the specific injuries are inconsistent with typical avalanche trauma. Furthermore, where were the telltale signs of a massive snow event? Other theories delve into the truly bizarre. The infrasound theory suggests that freak winds, interacting with the mountain's topography, generated low-frequency sounds capable of inducing panic, disorientation, and irrational flight. Imagine a fear without a discernible source, driving perfectly rational individuals to abandon safety. Then there is the darker whisper of military testing, fueled by the radiation traces and the Soviet Union's penchant for secrecy. Were they caught in an experimental, paradoxical bomb test, or encountered operatives enforcing a deadly silence? The absence of animal tracks and the specific, unnatural trauma effectively dismiss the idea of a simple animal attack. Each theory presents its own compelling fragments, yet none fully account for every chilling detail. The internal injuries without external signs, the missing facial features, the radiation, the desperate, unreasoning flight into the lethal cold. The truth remains stubbornly fragmented, elusive. Each theory, a carefully constructed scaffold of conjecture, inevitably buckles under the weight of some irrefutable, chilling detail. The avalanche cannot account for the tense, deliberate slashing, nor for the specific, brutal trauma found on bodies miles from the initial collapse. Infrasound, while plausible for panic, fails to explain the missing tongues or the inexplicable internal hemorrhages. Military involvement remains speculative, its evidence circumstantial, a wisp of radiation, the sudden official silence, lacking the concrete proof that would solidify it as truth. And the more esoteric explanations, while they weave a dark allure, dissolve under the scrutiny of scientific inquiry. The truth remains stubbornly fragmented, elusive, an unyielding puzzle. And it is precisely this stubborn elusiveness, this profound ambiguity, that cements the Dyatlov Pass incident in the annals of history's most disturbing cold cases. It endures not merely as a historical footnote, but as a chilling parable of human vulnerability against an incomprehensible force. We are captivated by it because it speaks to our deepest fears, of the unknown, of the wilderness's indifferent power, of tragedies that defy explanation and leave only questions in their wake. 9 young lives, full of promise, meticulously prepared, vanished into a void of logic. Their deaths rip at the fabric of our need for order, our desire to understand, leaving us with the unsettling realization that some forces may operate entirely beyond the grasp of human reason. The decades following the initial, hurried Soviet investigation saw the case gather dust, shrouded in official secrecy and public rumor. Yet the human impulse to understand proved resilient. Independent researchers, journalists, and enthusiasts consistently picked at the scabs of the official narrative. Documentaries were produced, books were written, and expeditions attempted to retrace the Dyatlov group's final steps, all seeking that elusive key. In a significant development, the Russian government reopened the case in 2019, promising a renewed, transparent investigation. Their findings, released in 2020, pointed definitively towards a specific type of avalanche, a rare slab avalanche, followed by hypothermia. The theory posited that a slow-moving snow slide dislodged a thick layer of snow, striking the tent, injuring some, and forcing the hikers to cut their way out. Disoriented and partially injured, they moved downhill to seek shelter, but the extreme cold, combined with paradoxical undressing caused by hypothermia, ultimately claimed their lives. This official re-examination, however, while attempting to provide a definitive answer, still left many veterans of the Dyatlov mystery unsatisfied. The very nature of the tent's collapse, they argued, did not perfectly align with the typical dynamics of a slab avalanche. More critically, the official narrative struggled to comprehensively account for the brutal and specific nature of some of the injuries: the fractured skulls, the broken ribs, the devastating internal trauma devoid of external marks, and the macabre missing tongues and eyes. These are not the hallmarks of a simple snow slide, followed by a desperate scramble in the cold. Nor did the theory fully explain the traces of radiation found on some clothing, or the precise, panicked manner in which the hikers' footprints scattered from the tent, suggesting a sudden, collective flight from an immediate and terrifying threat, rather than an orderly retreat from a compromised shelter. The official conclusion sought closure, yet in doing so, it left a gaping void where comprehensive answers should have been. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains, therefore, a stark testament to the limits of our understanding. We are left with fragments: the inexplicable damage to the tent, the discarded clothing, the radiation, the specific, brutal injuries, and the enduring silence of the mountains that hold their secrets close. Decades of speculation, investigation, and analysis have brought us no closer to a truly satisfying, comprehensive explanation that harmonizes every chilling detail. The official narratives provide partial frames, but the full picture remains stubbornly obscured. And so, the chilling question persists, echoing across the desolate slopes of Khalat Syakhl: what really happened in the Dyatlov Pass? The mountains, silent and unforgiving, keep their counsel, and perhaps some truths are simply too profound, too terrifying, to ever fully emerge from the ice and snow, leaving us forever to confront the unsettling reality of the unknown. To understand what really happened on Khalat Syakhl, we must first trace the steps of those who perished. Their story begins not with tragedy, but with a familiar human pursuit: ambition and the lure of the wilderness. Part 1: The Expedition and the Grim Discovery. In late January 1959, a group of 10 young, spirited, and highly experienced adventurers assembled in Sverdlovsk, now Yekaterinburg, Soviet Union. Led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, an engineering student at the Ural Polytechnic Institute, the expedition comprised 8 other students and one seasoned ski instructor, Semyon Zolotaryov. Their collective resume boasted extensive experience in challenging winter treks, their resilience honed by the unforgiving climate of the Soviet Urals. They were not novices, they were hardened individuals equipped for the rigors ahead. Their ambitious objective was to traverse 350 kilometers through the northern Urals, culminating in an ascent of Mount Otort. Don't go there, in the local Mansi language, a peak renowned for its treacherous conditions. The route was graded Category III, the most difficult classification for winter treks, promising severe temperatures, deep snow, and the constant threat of blizzards. This was a test of endurance, skill, and collective will. The journey commenced with the characteristic optimism of youth. They traveled by train, then truck, finally reaching Vizhay, the last inhabited settlement, on January 25th. From there, they began their ski trek into the deepening wilderness. Their progress was meticulously documented in journals and photographs, capturing the stark beauty of the snow-laden taiga, the camaraderie of the group, and the daily grind of setting up camp in sub-zero temperatures. One member, Yuri Yudin, was forced to turn back on January 28th due to worsening sciatica, a decision that would save his life but forever haunt him. The remaining 9 pressed on, heading deeper into a landscape that grew ever more remote and unforgiving. Their last known movements placed them on the eastern slopes of Khalat Syakhl, Dead Mountain, by the evening of February 1st. They had veered slightly off course, perhaps due to a blizzard, and instead of crossing the pass, decided to pitch their large, communal tent directly on the exposed mountainside. Journal entries spoke of biting wind and the exhaustion of carving out a snow platform. Photographs depict the methodical process of securing the tent, snow shovels at hand. The final images, taken in fading light, show a seemingly routine setup, the promise of a meal and shelter from the gathering night. No overt signs of alarm or impending disaster. The expedition was due to report back to Vijay by February 12th. When the deadline passed with no word, initial concern gave way to a creeping dread. Dyatlov Sports Club organized a search party by February 20th, soon augmented by the Soviet Army and local air support. The vast, white expanse of the northern Urals offered little, willingly surrendering nothing. Then, on February 26th, the abandoned tent was spotted by a search helicopter. The scene that greeted the ground team was instantly chilling, defying any rational explanation. The tent, partially collapsed under heavy snow, had not been packed down or left in an orderly fashion. Instead, it was found inexplicably slashed open from the inside, a violent rupture through the fabric. Inside, all their belongings remained: boots, winter clothing, food supplies, Dyatlov's personal journal, even their identification documents. It was as if the occupants had fled in an instant, leaving behind everything essential for survival in that unforgiving environment. The evidence was clear. Something had compelled them to abandon the relative safety of their shelter, fleeing into the bitter cold, unprepared. Further investigation by the search party revealed a line of footprints, 9 pairs in total, leading downhill from the tent towards a dense forest 1.5 kilometers away. The tracks were erratic, some bare, some clad only in socks, others wearing a single boot. They suggested urgency, confusion, perhaps panic. There were no signs of a struggle, no tracks other than their own. 2 days later, the first bodies were discovered at the edge of the forest, beneath a sprawling cedar tree. Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko, both students, lay side by side, partially unclothed. Krivonishenko wore only underwear and a t-shirt. Doroshenko, underwear and a shirt, 1 sock. Their hands were severely burned, suggesting a desperate, futile attempt to build a fire from sparse cedar branches, which themselves showed signs of having been broken off from above, indicating someone had climbed the tree. Both had died from hypothermia. Yet their bodies bore peculiar bruising, notably to Krivonishenko's knuckles and Doroshenko's forehead. The absence of adequate clothing in such extreme conditions was paradoxical, a grim testament to the speed and intensity of their flight. The unsettling truth was beginning to emerge. This was no ordinary mountain tragedy. The revelation of Krivonishenko and Doroshenko was merely the prelude to a far more disturbing scene. As the search intensified, expanding across the desolate landscape of Khalat Syakhl, the frozen earth began to yield its remaining secrets. Weeks turned into months. The harsh Siberian spring arrived late, reluctantly loosening the mountain's icy grip, allowing access to the ravine where the remaining bodies were eventually discovered. On May 4th, nearly 3 months after the initial alarm, the remains of Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Zolotaryov, and Nikolay Thiboksbrignoles were found buried deep under more than a dozen feet of matted snow in a snow cave they had seemingly dug for shelter. A few days later, Semyon Zolotaryov's body was recovered nearby. The discoveries were harrowing, the condition of the victims defying any conventional explanation of death by exposure. The injuries sustained by this second group were beyond perplexing. They were horrific. Thiboksbrignoles had suffered a severe skull fracture, a crushing blow to the head that, in any other context, would suggest immense force. Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov presented an even grimmer tableau. Massive internal injuries, including multiple fractured ribs and catastrophic internal hemorrhaging, yet with no external signs of trauma, no broken skin, no bruising visible on their bodies. It was as if they had been subjected to the immense pressures of a car crash, but by an invisible assailant. Furthermore, Dubinina's tongue, eyes, and part of her lip were missing, and Zolotaryov's eyeballs had also been removed. These grotesque mutilations appeared post-mortem, but the precision and nature of them added a layer of chilling dread, making the scene feel less like a natural disaster and more like a deliberate, almost ritualistic act. Adding to the catalog of bizarre findings was the paradoxical undressing observed among several of the victims. Despite the sub-zero temperatures, some hikers were found partially clothed, others missing shoes or vital outer garments, scattered between the tent and the distant makeshift fire. This phenomenon, often associated with severe hypothermia, suggests a final, desperate disorientation before death, yet it rarely occurs in a situation where escape from a tent would necessitate such a frenzied, ill-prepared dash into the fatal cold. The mystery deepened with the discovery of small, yet significant, traces of radiation on some of the clothing items, particularly those belonging to Krivonishenko and Dubinina. Though dismissed by initial Soviet investigations as insignificant, the detail lingered, a discordant note in an already dissonant symphony of evidence. Further, the footprints leading away from the tent told a story of disorganized panic. They were not the orderly tracks of hikers retreating from an avalanche, but a confused scattering, some barefoot, some in socks, some in single boots, leading down towards the forest, suggesting a frantic, uncoordinated flight from an immediate, unseen threat inside their supposedly secure shelter. The initial Soviet investigation, remarkably swift in its conclusion, found that the group had died from a compelling natural force, a phrase that itself felt like an evasion, and subsequently sealed the case files, declaring them classified for decades. This official stonewalling, coupled with the utterly baffling evidence, served only to fuel the burgeoning legend and deepen the questions surrounding what truly transpired on that frigid slope. The mountains had claimed lives before, but never with such an unsettling tapestry of incongruous horrors.